Welcome everyone to our Kepler College Astrology Book Club author Q&A. My name is Misty Lane and I'm your book club admin, and I'm here today with Alan Annand. Is that how you say your last name? Or is it
And
Anand?
Annand, actually, accent on the
Annand?
first. Yeah, that's it.
Alan Annand. Okay. So I'm here today with Alan Annand, author of our July Book of the Month, Mutual Reception. So I'll be keeping an eye out on the chat for everyone watching. So if you have any question along the way, please feel free to ask anything that comes to mind. But Alan, can you start by telling us a little bit about yourself and your background in astrology and your drive to write this book?
All right. Sure. Well, as I was saying to you earlier, I'm originally from New Brunswick, which is like living in the woods in Maine. And when I first got interested in astrology, there was no such thing as a local astrological society or anything like that to become engaged in. So after reading a couple of books, I thought, okay, I need to get an education. And where am I going to get an education living where I am? So I looked around at the time, and there were three possibilities for correspondence courses. One was the NCGR, National Council of Geocosmic Research, an American organization. And another one was the American Federation of Astrologers, the AFA. And the third was the Faculty of Astrological Studies in England. So being Canadian and sort of, romantically linked to the Commonwealth and the Queen, I thought there was little choice, but I had to sign up for the Faculty of Astrological Studies. Well, long story short, I mean, it was pretty onerous. This was back in the day. I don't want to date myself, but this was back in the day before there was email. We used to do everything correspondence course. You're all by yourself. You get a book, you get a syllabus, you get all your assignments, and you do this all on your lonesome. And then you write it up and you put it in an envelope and lick some stamps and send it off to England. And then wait,
What?
and then wait 3 months for it to come back. No, I exaggerate a little bit on the timeline, but I'm not kidding
Mhm.
about the snail mail, and it's a well-named snail mail. Anyway, it was a 3-year program which I accelerated by moving to England for the
Yep.
second half of it, where basically I kind of imposed myself upon my tutor and accelerated my studies. Long story short, well, I'd chosen the faculty because their program was really quite rigorous. I mean, compared to the other organizations, I thought it looked like Marine boot camp for Western astrology. So I thought, hey, I'm up for it. So in the end, after my program, I had to write 16 hours worth of examinations. I mean, this is back
Mhm.
in the day. I mean, this is developing modern currency that people are now, on Kepler. In fact, you guys have some instructors teaching people how to calculate by hand horoscopes. Well, back in this era, I mean, everybody had to do exactly that. So, natal charts, solar return charts, lunar return charts, progression, secondary progressions, primary directions, all this we had to calculate by hand, sometimes using logarithmic tables. Anyway, it's a very full syllabus with history, philosophy, and every aspect of Western astrology, which was natal interpretation with psychological implications, anything to do with career, relationships, electional, horary astrology, question and answer resolution, electional astrology, choosing appropriate times to launch activities, esoteric techniques like midpoints, harmonics, the grand schmear. We learned it all. Anyway, culminating in these 16 hours of exams. So after I had my diploma in hand, I returned to Canada, and it was at that point that I relocated from New Brunswick to Montreal, because I said, wow, now that I'm a certified astrologer, where am I going to find clients? I'm not going to find them in backwoods New Brunswick like Maine. So I moved to Montreal at that point, and plugged into a local astrological group who was looking for a teacher. And so I said, oh, well, freshly minted diploma here, I'll teach. So before long, I was teaching beginners, intermediate, and advanced courses, which I continued to do for many years while I started with my practice. and spoke at national conferences and had occasional TV and radio spots talking about astrology. Oh, one of my early predictions, successful predictions way back in that day when Charles and Diana got married, Prince Charles,
Hmm.
Diana. I predicted at the time on CBC Radio that, based on the wedding day chart, that the marriage would fail. Whoa!
Oh,
You can't imagine the hate mail that the CBC radio office received because of what I'd said. They thought people thought it was outrageous. Anyway, you know what happened. Um,
yeah.
so it goes. Astrology, has got a power. I mean, we can be prudent and not say things that we see, and we can be imprudent and say things that are not well thought out. I've done
Hmm.
those. Uh, it's got a power to succeed. Anyway, I continued in this vein as a Western astrologer for about 15 years. And there was a point there in my mid 30s or late 30s where I really thought I knew it all. I mean, this was hubris in action. But I thought I knew it all because, I had a couple of university degrees under my belt. I had this diploma in astrology from a well-known organization. I had
Hmm.
about 15 years of experience. But I knew all the Western techniques, but I was always keen on predicting, but I felt I was not really hitting it like I ought to be with prediction. So I began to wonder, okay, is it me? No, it can't be me. I'm smart. I've really worked hard. I've got credentials. It's not me. Maybe it's the system. And so at that point, it opened up my mind for the first time, like, is there something else that could serve me? And by coincidence, at the time, for whatever birthday that was, somebody gave me a book on ancient Hindu astrology for the modern Western astrologer. And I started to read it and I almost threw the book away because when I realized that I was going to have to convert my horoscope from a tropical zodiac to sidereal, and a lot of my fire sign placements were going to become water signs, it was like, no, I can't.
Uh,
But I persevered and I accept that this seems to speak a better truth than what I was previously working with. So, okay, I'm going to get into it. I went to a conference in San Diego the next year, a Vedic astrology conference, and I came back home with a suitcase full of books and software for Vedic astrology. And during that conference, I met several people and said, "Oh, you're Canadian. You must know Hart Defoe." I said, "Who? Hart Defoe? No." And they said, "Oh, amazing teacher, practitioner. You should know him." So I later found out, okay, he lives in Toronto. And so after some nagging, I finally got a consultation with him and went. And I thought that was really good. And I said, if you ever teach anything, let me know. So 6 months later, I got an email saying, giving a weekend seminar on relationship compatibility, synastry, Vedic style. So I went for that and thought, okay, this is really good. I told him again, if you teach anything else more substantial, I'm in. So maybe about a year later, I got another email. Okay, I'm starting a full-blown, like a series of programs, 6 weeks of duration for each in residency in Albuquerque, New Mexico. So away I went for the first of those and continued in that vein. And then next thing you know, I spent a decade on and off going to the Bay Area in California for more and more and more of these courses. Anyway, long story short, that's making a short story long, I think. But basically, I did a total conversion. I gave away almost all of my Western astrology books,
wow.
and I probably had a library of about, who knows, 60 books or something like that. But I pared it right down to literally half a dozen, I think is all I have left. And then, spent all my money on Vedic astrology books after that and continued to study and practice. And I started my practice as a Vedic astrologer while I was still in Montreal, and then moved to Toronto to be closer to my teacher and his guru, and continued on in that vein where I made a practice here. And then at the encouragement of my teacher's guru, I switched from writing novels to writing books on astrology. And to date, I kind of forget how many I've written. I guess it's 10 books on astrology.
Mhm.
7 of them on Vedic astrology and 3 of them on Western astrology, uh, included among which is mutual reception, still adhering to the sidereal zodiac, because once you go over to that side and you realize, well, anyway, I won't go into that, but I became convinced, and this was after 15 years as a tropical astrologer. Once I started using sidereal astrology, it just seemed to work a whole lot better. I think a lot of
Mhm.
people who disparage it or say, you know what, that doesn't work for my chart, that's not the test of anything, that it works for your chart. Look at your friend's chart, your mom and dad's chart, your siblings, your boyfriend, and 100 other people, and then tell me that it doesn't work for you. Anyway, be that as it may, I'm not here to beat the drum on sidereal astrology, but it is my belief that it's worthwhile people looking at that as an option. Enough of that.
Yeah.
What about you?
Well, I was actually hoping we could beat the drum on Vedic astrology just because it is such a big part of the book. And I was wondering, just from your experience, in that transition, because you mentioned in the book you recognize that your audience, your readers are mostly going to be Western astrologers. And so do you think that it's possible to for people to blend the two, or is it sort of one thing where you're like it has to be this way or the other and you can't take one concept from one and put it in the other? Is there a way to work with both of them?
Let me give you an analogy. Spend enough time with me, you'll get tired of my analogies, but imagine this, if you would. Imagine you're a conventionally trained doctor in the Western medical system. Okay, so you
Mhm.
get through 10 years of schooling and you know medicine very well, and you can practice in that regard. Now imagine as well that by some quirk of your character, you've been interested enough in foreign systems as well too, and you've also had a really good education and training in traditional Chinese medicine. And let's really stack it up. And you've also studied Ayurveda, which is the Indian system of medicine. Now, I would like to go to a doctor like that who knows
Mhm.
all those systems, because I think you can keep your head clear. You don't get muddled up, mixed up, and confusing one system with another. You say, "When I'm going to look at the client, for this issue, first I'm going to put on my Western astrologer, Western medicine glasses, and I'm going to study the patient with that. And then I'm going to switch gears and I'm going to look at it through a different paradigm, and so on and so forth." So I can do that to this day because I had 15 plus years training and practice as a Western astrologer. And I can flip over there and I can participate in any conversation whatsoever. And if a client demands it, I can interpret their chart in Western astrology mode as well as anybody else. But I can also flip over and do Vedic astrology too. And it's my belief, as proven by my own bias, I guess, over the years, is that I never look at a Western chart anymore because I feel no need to do that. I mean, that might sound pretty absolute and, elitist, but in my early days, in the days when I was still a Western astrologer and I was learning Vedic astrology, there was probably about 2 or 3 years there that when I had a client, ugh, I was doing double homework in preparation. I did my full prep using Western astrology, all the tools that I'd learned from Faculty of Astrological Studies.
Mhm.
And then when that was done, I flipped over, cranked out the Vedic astrology chart, went through the entire analysis, which is entirely different, and look to see, do I have common ground here where I can be really confident that both systems are saying the same thing to me? In many instances, that was so. In other instances, not. I mean, charts are peculiar things. And again, it's a bit of serendipity. It depends on when you're born. Just for example, for instance, if you're born between the 15th and the 20th of any month, you will be in the same sun sign no matter whether your chart is tropical or sidereal. I'm one of those. My birthday is April 16th. So I'm an Aries in both systems, no matter what. Sun in Aries. Now the rest of it may change quite a bit, but so there are some commonalities. And if you're, basing your interpretation on those kind of sun sign attributes, well, you're going to end up saying the same thing, except that
Right.
I never, rest upon sun sign attributes. As you know, astrology is a whole lot more complicated. But
Mhm.
going back to your question, is it possible to have two systems and work with them? Yes. Even in Vedic astrology, there are literally one, two, three different distinct systems within Vedic astrology, wherein people choose one or two among those to become practiced in. And then the deal is, don't mix them up when you're doing that. If you're doing Parashara, which is the classic Vedic astrology, you do that. But then if you want to look at it through the eyes of Jaimini astrology, who's another famous rishi, you just take another mindset and you follow the rules for that. And then, you look for commonality. As a number of practicing Jyotishis, that's the name for Vedic astrology, they will do that and dovetail their analyses to see where common ground is found. And that really plays out productively when you make predictions. If you use one system and say, looks like this person could get married summer of 2026, and you use the other system and it says, second quarter, third quarter look really good for marriage for, through this other system. Well, then the overlap is, gives you a lot of confidence that you can say to that person, third quarter of 2026 looks really good as far as relationships go. So it helps to know more than one system. People could productively know both Western astrology and Vedic astrology and perhaps Chinese astrology as well, too. I mean, don't draw any boundaries. The
I
more you,
do really love that perspective, just that in that analogy with the doctor, yes, I would want a doctor who has all of those perspectives. So that's some really good insight there. Um, when it comes to house systems, you put in the last chapter some cautionary guidelines, and you kind of touched on it just now with the tropical zodiac guideline. Don't expect the same results using the tropical zodiac. But you also mentioned don't expect identical results using unequal house systems. Can you share a little bit about why the house system matters with mutual reception?
yeah, and I think my work has been made, or my argument has been facilitated to a very significant degree by the work of Chris Brennan and
Mhm.
Demetra George, who, by virtue of their publications and their teachings, have made whole sign houses now quite acceptable. Where when I started, there were equal houses, but not whole sign houses. So the notion, for anyone who's not aware of it, is that if your ascendant falls within a certain sign, from now forward, you treat that entire sign as the first house. And then the other houses just follow in the zodiacal order of the signs. What's good about that is that you clearly know who is the house lord. Because if it's Aries rising, well, the ascendant lord is Mars, and the fifth lord has got to be the sun, and the ninth lord has got to be Sagittarius. Now, if you start using unequal houses where the axis of the ascendant and the midheaven can be inclined quite a degree, and maybe you don't realize that if you don't live in northern latitudes or deal with clients who are from northern latitudes, but the further north you go and the further away you get from the summer solstice, the more this thing will happen. And
Mhm.
then what you have is wildly distorted houses that are much less than 30 degrees in one quadrant of the horoscope and much more than 30 degrees in the adjacent quadrant. So then you can have the same planet ruling both your fifth and sixth houses, and some other sign that's squished in there in the middle. Its lord is not functioning at all. So, doesn't enjoy a house lordship. So it's the whole sign house system has been used in, Hellenistic astrology, Vedic astrology, Babylonian astrology, et cetera, et cetera. It's only in relatively modern times, in the last couple centuries, let's say, when people really got a handle on astronomy and started to play around with the division of the houses using either spatial logic or time logic and so on and so forth. But the problem is that, people get attached to their favorites for whatever reason, often
Hmm.
because they like the look of their horoscope through Campanus versus Regiomontanus versus Plaza. And sometimes it's simple availability of table of houses. When I was beginning, what was available was Placidus, table of houses. That's what pretty much everybody used. But throughout the 80s and 90s, there was a whole lot of, Kosh became popular. And then people started to resurrect some of the older systems that I alluded to earlier. And then everyone's using a different system. And, it's harder to compare, apples to apples because, the
Hmm.
different house systems and the logic changes. When lords change, and frankly, in modern astrology, people have seemingly lost this ability to pay any attention to what happens if the Lord of the fifth goes to the sixth or the eighth or the ninth or the 10th. There's a difference. Basically, in modern astrology, a lot of people seem to obsess upon aspects. Oh, sun and moon are in trine. Wow. Okay. Mercury and Mars are square. And, the patterns that exist. Oh, look, there's a grand trine or there's a T square. Right? People seem to obsess over that. I mean, I admit I did as well too in my day.
Hmm.
But it's only with greater study in traditional Western astrology, horary astrology in particular, and especially with the application of Vedic astrology, we pay a whole lot more attention to where's the Lord of that house gone? What is its condition? What are the influences upon it?
Okay. Yeah. And I do think, yeah, doing the equal house systems, especially for that, absolutely makes it one easier, but just more understandable. And you touched on this, that people are extremely committed to their chosen house system. So I'm sure we have people in the group who are extremely committed to Placidus. If someone was only like, I'm only going to look at my chart in Placidus, do you have any advice for how how to read the mutual reception with that?
My
Or is
advice
it just
My advice would be get over your bias and try a whole sign system, even if only because it simplifies, it
hmm
creates a simpler foundation from which to launch your interpretation. And if when you're learning anything new, it behooves you to like simplify your process, simplify your analysis, especially if it's a new concept, right? If
Oh,
you're
yes.
dealing with a new concept, but you're also dealing with, a variable system, like a variable house system, the question immediately arises. Does this work in that house system? Or more likely, I tried it and it doesn't work. Well, yeah, because it's a bit of a conundrum using unequal host systems sets your system against the other system. So it's better to simplify it and go from there. And then once you understand that, then you can play around with experimenting with predictions. And we could really get into the weeds in this, but we can't do it without a couple of horoscopic examples where we could put up.
Exactly.
We're not going to do that today.
No, not today.
I'm prepared for, a certain amount of probing and explanation, but not,
Right.
it can be done, but it requires some preparation and example charts to do this to show how you could get yourself into a cul-de-sac, a dead end, and not be able to proceed by doing that, and therefore ignore something that was significant only because you've set up a host system that will not facilitate that kind of analysis. So it goes.
Okay, so if you're committed to Placidus, check it out in whole sign first or another equal house system and see how it changes. That seems
No,
like the way
no,
to
well, yes,
know.
yeah, an equal house system will work, yes, because in that you plant, let's say your ascendant is at 10 degrees Aries. In an equal house system, the second house cusp will be in 10 degrees Taurus.
Okay.
The third house cusp, so-called cusp, will be in 10 degrees Gemini, and so on and so forth. That will work if you use an equal house system. But if you use an equal house system or whole sign house system, will work just fine. But as soon as you go to an unequal system, unequal host system, you're on your own, kid. It might not work.
Okay, good to know.
It might
Okay,
work,
let me.
but it might not.
It's fun to experiment at least, just to
Yeah.
check it out. Okay, let's see what other questions we have. Okay, so of course, the book focuses on mutual reception as per the title, but you also mention when you're introducing the idea of receptions that they can also be more one-sided. Maybe one planet is receiving another, but it doesn't have that same option on the other side. So, can you explain some differences about that?
I don't want to go into that in
Okay.
this conversation. That's discussed in the book. And I think what you're referencing is one of the very early chapters when I talk about the various forms of reception that exist, sometimes between signs of exaltation, sometimes between signs of triplicity, sometimes between the so-called terms, bounds, and deacons. Yeah, we're not going to get into that.
Yeah.
The simplest of receptions is that which William Lilly, the famous 17th century horary astrologer, uh, said about reception. He said the most powerful, and this is in the book, the most powerful reception is mutual reception by sign, where planet A occupies the sign of planet B, and planet B
Mhm.
occupies the sign of planet A. They are in each other's sign. He says that is the most powerful. And, you know, in other forms of reception, there are certain caveats which say that reception doesn't really exist unless there's a classical aspect between them, you know, square, opposition, trine, or sextile. William Lilly says with mutual reception by sign, that is not necessary. So long as the reception by sign exists, the matter will be resolved by their exchange of signs, and that's it. And my book,
Okay.
you know, the bulk of the book is simply rests on that premise, which is the core of practice in Vedic astrology too, where this book, where that pattern goes under the name of Parivartana Yoga. Yoga just means a pattern. Parivartana, if you translate it, it means moving about, switching places, exchanging, that sort of thing. And so it's the two in that regard are equal in effect.
Okay.
I
Okay.
do have something that I want to, I have something I want
Yes.
to display to you, but I want to be cognizant of your budget for time and how much time I have to address that. I won't take up a whole lot of time,
Hmm.
but you know, yesterday I went into your posting on the book club, and I saw your comments and your questions, and I saw a number of other people's comments and questions. And given the opportunity, I would like to address that with a simple
Oh,
statement.
yes, absolutely. We typically take up to an hour, so we're at just over 30 minutes right now, so you have plenty of time. Absolutely.
Okay, I don't want to dictate this agenda. If you've got other questions you want to pitch me with, because for me to discuss this, to address, you know, the primary things that I saw there, 15 minutes would probably do it. So, you know, if you got other stuff that you want to pitch, have at it.
I
Or,
actually think our next question was actually going to be along those lines, so
okay.
absolutely go ahead with it.
Okay, then I will need to share my screen. May I have permission to do that? So this is just one of a series of little silly memes I made up using this guy who is the you know, what was his famous line? I don't always want beer, but when I do, I prefer Dos Equis.
Yep.
So that's a famous beer commercial. So actually, I stole his meme, and I churned out like 2 dozen astrological memes. So this is one that I use in my mutual reception presentations. I don't always want company, but when I do, I prefer mutual reception. Yeah, who doesn't like mutual reception? Okay,
That's the way to
so
do it.
let me. Oh, no, I can't advance my slide. What's going on here? Let me see what's going on. Back to my slide presentation. Slideshow. Okay, I need to advance this. Let me see. Oops. Okay, hang on. I'm just going to stop share, and then I'm going to share again. Sorry,
No, you're good.
little goofed up here. Oh, that's not as big as it should be. From current slide. What is going on? Okay, there. You see these two very large dials filling the screen? The houses, people versus
Yes.
screens. Yeah. Okay.
Yes.
So your question, like was a good prompt. The more I delve into older classical astrological literature, the more I run into statements that seem, a little
Yeah.
outrageous. I'm paraphrasing, and I'm not blaming you because, yeah, did I experience much the same thing when I began to read, uh, especially Vedic astrology? So,
Hmm.
word on that. The manner of language in modern Western astrology, a lot of stuff is pitched as, this may happen. The person has a tendency to do this. This might happen. And very often it's with a sort of a psychological slant, as opposed to a sort of fact-based, bold statement of conditions. So, I see somebody took me to task on this, saying, "Oh, this is quite dangerous because it's." Well, so the comment was that you had put up an example of an exchange between Lord of the Second and Lord of the 12th, and I'll quote it here.
Hmm.
It said, and this is a direct quote from my book. So he is sexually attracted to a member of the extended family. For example, the mother's older sibling, period. His second marriage is based upon sexual attraction, and the spouse is aggressive. Okay, so that made you wonder, and legitimately so, right? Because these are pretty
Hmm.
statements, and about a sensitive aspect of our lives.
Yeah, I'm like,
So
this is extremely specific and
it is.
also weird.
Yeah, right. Okay, so I caution to add that if you go back to, that section of the exchange between the second and the 12th, there's a whole lot of other stuff there that I say as well too, right?
Hmm.
Probably regarding money, because the second house is a money house and 12th house is loss. So, this is a pattern that is not very good for one's financial condition, right? Or, can create problems. So it wasn't just about sex. That was you plucked out,
Hmm.
but that was you know, um, eye-catching, let's say. Okay, so somebody said this is quite dangerous as it's positioned as a definitive statement. And any experienced astrologer knows that one aspect or even more couldn't define this kind of experience. I agree entirely. Here's the thing, in the classics of Vedic astrology, they make this kind of bold statement simply to be clear. If something is, for instance, if Jupiter is in the fifth house in its own sign, the books will say this person is extremely fortunate. They're a brilliant student. They're going to have multiple children who will be healthy and go on to enjoy fame. Okay. Contrast that with Saturn debilitated in Aries in the fifth house. A single nugget of information, and now the books will say this person will never have children. If they do, they'll die early. If they don't die early, they'll die later. If they don't die later, they'll be sickly. If they're not sickly, they will bring disgrace to the family, and on and on and on like this.
Hmm.
So there's a phrase for this in Sanskrit. It's called arthavada, which means exaggerated statements. Because back in the day when this stuff was published, there were no italics, there was no bold to apply to text, there was no little sidebar graphic where you could highlight this thing to make it seem more or less important. All you could do was use exaggerated language to make a clear statement so that people knew which direction you were heading in. You weren't being wishy-washy about this. You definitely knew that Jupiter and Sagittarius in the fifth was wonderful for kids or your intelligence, or Saturn
Mhm.
debilitated in Aries in the fifth was you're a dummy and your kids are going to be dummies too. Please don't be offended, anybody out there who's got Saturn in Aries, because to Michelle Prentice's point, yes, one swallow does not make a spring, right? We are always looking for two or preferably three factors out of the horoscope, which are additive, cumulative, or supportive in order to make a truly bold statement to the
Mhm.
client. This is a reference text where it's meant to plant a seed. This configuration is problematic for this, or it will indicate that. But for God's sakes, don't stop there. You've got to look at the rest of the horoscope. And I say at one point here, early on in the book, just before I get into all that detail of the house exchanges, basically, right at the outset of part two, I guess, which is, well, it doesn't matter what chapter, but part two, where I say that, you know, these are sort of nuggets of interpretation, but don't go crazy as if this was the be all end all of the interpretation.
Right.
There's the rest of the horoscope that has to be incorporated. Okay, so back to this. Oh, well, maybe I'll address some of these other comments first. So Chloe Plum says, "Oh, this is one of 1,000 possibilities." And, you know, some authors, I suppose, wanted to offer some original possibilities they hadn't heard others dare to suggest, without issuing a disclaimer that the likelihood of this would be 1 in 1,000. Well, you know, just on the level of statistics or mathematics, the odds of having a 212 exchange in your horoscope is only 1.5% anyway. And I go through the math in this book just to get a sense that any single exchange is, you know, relatively rare. And then I add what I just said, which is that that particular piece of information can only give you a thesis. Then you've got to look at other parts of the chart and say, is there any other evidence to this? It's like trying to convict somebody on murder on the single fact that they owned the murder weapon. Yeah. But what about motive? Where were they on the night of the murder? And all the rest of that goes into crime scene.
Right.
So horoscopy is a bit like that. I mean, we're looking for multiple pieces of evidence. All I'm offering here are ideas that will launch you into a certain consideration that this, that, and the other thing is possible.
Exactly.
Lunar Man thinks that I've got sex on the brain from my own fires. Well,
Uh,
Lunar Man, I went to university in the 60s. I think we called 1969 the summer of love. You can figure it out from there. Okay, so back to this particular combination. Lord of the second and Lord of the 12th in exchange. I'm going to deconstruct this for you right now, courtesy of these two schematics. So here's the thing. You know that in the horoscope, you can find everybody in your life. Did you know that?
mhm.
You can find it, and I show that on the left schematic, where I've indicated first is the self. And some of these may not be entirely familiar to you, but they're familiar to many, and certainly in the scheme of Vedic astrology and some other aspects of ancient, you know, traditional astrology, these things are all in place. First is the self. Second is your nuclear family, meaning mom and dad and your siblings. In general, you know, in general, your family. Third house is siblings, but especially younger siblings. Fourth house, mother. Fifth house, child. Sixth house, relatives. Seventh house, spouse. Eighth house, their family, so your in-laws. Ninth, father. 10th, boss. 11th, friends and older siblings. And 12th, the lover, if that's separate from the spouse. Okay, so for instance, if I were to ask you, how do you find your grandchild in this? Do you know how to do that? Using logic we call derivative house analysis.
Yes, but so grandchild, that would be the child of my child. So I'd look at my fifth house for my child and then five houses from that for my grandchild. Is that
Yes,
correct?
yep,
Okay.
you're on it, and I
Okay.
won't put you on the spot anymore for that, but bravo. So you know that. So if the child is in the fifth house, then their child is 5 away from that, which takes you to the ninth. So, but I could ask you another question. I could say, all right, the fifth is where your first child is, but you've got 2 kids. Where do we find your second kid?
Ooh. So that would probably be 3 houses from the fifth house. So that would be the seventh house.
All right, Misty, I'll take you on as a third.
Yay, I'm passing.
Okay, and if you had 3 kids, where do we find the third kid?
Oh my gosh, 3 kids. Okay, so sibling of my, ooh, this one's getting harder.
Well, I'll help you. First child was in the fifth. You
Okay,
logically said 3 away from that will give me the second child in the seventh. Apply
okay,
the
so
same
the third
logic.
just be third away from
Yep,
that?
yep. It's
Okay.
their younger sibling. Yeah. So your third child will be found in the ninth house, and it goes on and on like that. I mean,
Mhm.
for instance, and then so we dealt with younger siblings, successive siblings. Let's say, do you have any older siblings?
I'm an only child.
Too bad. So it doesn't work for you. But so get this, if you did have an older sibling, that sibling is found in the 11th house. Can you understand the logic that from their point of view, your older sibling sitting in the 11th house, you, the ascendant, are found 3 houses away because you are their younger sibling, right? So we take, let's say you did have an older brother and his name was John. John is found in house 11. Uh, from John's house 11, if he counts 3 away, he ends up in the first house, which is you. So,
Okay.
so it goes. And you can find anybody in your life here, your boss's wife, your boss's son, your boss's second kid, your boss's father. I mean, anywhere you want to go, you can find this by a derivative house analysis. So now let me
Exactly.
lead you on the nose with this. So if you are found in the first house, where is your older sibling found?
If I'm in the first house, older sibling, that's 11th,
Yeah.
right?
Okay,
Okay.
fine. Now let's go to your mom. If your mother is in the fourth house, where is your mom's older sibling?
Mm,
Same
that
logic.
would be my second house.
Exactly. How did you get there? You went backwards by 3 signs from your mom. Mom is in the
Yes.
fourth, and you counted backwards 3 to get to the second. Just as you did with the self, you could go forward 11 to find your older sib, or it's faster just to go backwards 3, right? But you did it. However you did it right. So hold that thought. Where is your mom's older sister? In the second house. Yeah? Okay. So
Yes.
let's go to my statement. He is sexually attracted. Why sex? The 12th house is this. Okay, now we go over to the right-hand side. You
Okay.
know that the houses are associated not only with people in the life, parts of the body. Yeah. You know where to find
Yes.
the head, the face, the throat, the arms, the bowel, the genitals. You can find all those in the chart. I didn't put that up because we're not going to talk about that today. But
Right.
we know that we can place all the parts of the body in the 12 house schematic. I chose not to do that. I simply wanted to present the themes. Argue with me if you want, but these are the major themes for all the various houses. We can just cherry pick the big ones. Body, fame, personality in the first house. Fifth house, creativity. Creativity includes kids. Creativity and intelligence. Seventh house, partnerships. 10th house, profession, status, karma. This is all familiar to you, right?
Hmm.
So on and so forth. So each of these have themes. So draw your attention to the 12th house. The 12th house is the house of expenses and loss and what they call, quote unquote, pleasures of the bed.
Okay.
Now, that's a generic kind of phrase, which is meant to
Right.
include 2 things. What happens in your bed? Well, one of those pleasures is sleep. Am I right?
Yeah,
We
that
go to
that's
bed to
something
sleep.
I would initially go to
Yeah,
with that 12th house, but
yeah, but it's
rephrasing it
useful.
like that, yes.
Yeah, and it's useful. And you know, when you encounter now a client with a sleep disorder, now you will know to look at their 12th house. What else
Hmm.
happens in the 12th house? Dreams. Is sleeping not a pleasure? My God, it's more than a pleasure. It's essential for
Yep.
healthy body and mind, right? Dreams are a part of that as well too, you know, arguably a pleasure as well too. So, and you know, outright the pleasure of sexual experience. Okay, so that's why the 12th house. So go back to my statement. He is sexually attracted. Why does sex rear its head here? Because we're talking about an exchange between house 2 and house 12. House
Mhm.
12 invokes the theme of sex. That's why we can talk about sex. But if you read through the rest of my description of exchange of 2 and 12, like many times it's money. Sometimes it's expenses. Sometimes it might be, oh, I don't know what, charitable donations. And I don't know, I haven't refreshed my memory on it. But anyway, sex comes up because it's one of the domains, one of the themes for the 12th house. He's attracted to a member of the extended family. The second house, we've already said, is generically the family, the entire mom and dad, brothers and sisters, and everyone in that family tree as well, too. Very, very generally. But how does it link to, for example, the mother's older sibling? Well, I just led you by the nose through the logic that from the mother in the fourth, the older sibling, 11 houses removed, will end you in the second house. So now we have the second house, a mother's elder sibling, connected with the theme of sex, the 12th. There's the
Mhm.
connection for that statement. Now let's go on to the second one. His second marriage is based upon sexual attraction and the spouse is aggressive. So where is marriage found?
That would be in the 7th house.
Exactly. Okay, that is where the first marriage is found. Have you any clue where the second marriage is found?
I think, isn't that in the 9th?
No.
No.
What typically breaks up the first marriage? Not always, but typically. What ends that marriage?
I would say, I mean, from what I know, finances are a common um cause for divorce or death could be. So that would be probably the 8th house.
Okay, hold that thought because you said something, two things there that I want to cherry pick out and say. Okay,
Hmm.
death is one and infidelity is the other.
Okay.
Now, the death of the relationship, if you anchor the relationship in the seventh house, where is its death? It's 8 houses away from that. See the simple logic?
Okay.
Hey, where is your
Yes.
death? Where is your death? Your body and your existence exist in house 1. Where's your death? It's in house 8, right? So we're
Ooh.
using that simple concept to apply it to a different part of the chart. When we go to the seventh house and say, where is the death of the seventh house relationship? It's 8 houses removed, and that is the second house. So the second
Hmm.
house can be the indicator of the second spouse because it's that infidelity or attraction or subsequent development of a relationship that means the end of that first relationship. So the second house is a significator for marriage number 2. If we're interested in marriage number 3, we could then go 8 houses away from that. 8 houses away from the second would put us in the ninth. And that would the third marriage. Like, oh, how far
Yeah.
can we go for this? Like, get out Mickey Rooney's chart. Okay. Anyway,
Uh,
we're not going to go further, but just come back to that. Second house then represents the second marriage and therefore the second spouse. So this is what I said. His second marriage is based upon sexual attraction. So we're back to the second house and we're retaining the theme of sexuality because it's an exchange of 2 and 12. Why is the spouse aggressive? Well, one of the things is that the 12th house is what we call an evil house. Aside from it bequeathing bed pleasures and other things, 6, 8, and 12 are problematic houses. And they often
mhm.
indicate some sort of dysfunctionality in life, either for oneself or the person that we're scrutinizing by derivative house analysis. So we're now we're pairing up two notions that the second house represents the second marriage, that spouse, and the 12th house is sexuality, and also that the 12th house is an evil house representative quite often of some degree of dysfunction. And it's all depending on what lens you want to apply to this at any given moment. But there is the logic. So, one of those, I could have said sickly as well too. The spouse is sickly and or aggressive, and either one would have fit the bill. But there's the logic. And this all follows through from two, classic impositions, which
Exactly.
go on further with bodily parts and all the rest of that, using people in the life, body parts, classic professions, themes of the houses, and so on and so forth, and mix and match based upon the sign exchange of these two house lords, where you get a kind of a symbiotic effect where you're obliged to try to merge those meanings. And I tell you, the bigger your vocabulary is for what the houses means, as opposed to the very simplistic notion of houses, second house is money and nothing else, well, you won't get far with your interpretation if that's all you think it is.
Exactly.
To expand that vocabulary. The more you can, the more you can create possibility in your mind's eye. But then, of course, you need to do the homework and say, well, is there anything else in the chart that sort of supports such an outrageous statement? And then you have to go through that, and maybe not. And then you say, well, okay, I'm not going to say that to the client because it doesn't seem to hold water with other evidence. But if it does, well, maybe I'm going to go down the road. Admittedly, yes, it seems like an outrageous statement, but it has substance in the analysis of the horoscope. Once you know what you're doing with a good command of house associations and the derivative house analysis to find anybody you want, and invoking the themes that are relevant to the discussion that's underway in the client. I mean, you can have a health-related discussion, you can have a career-related discussion, you can have a relationship-related discussion, you can go very deep into psychology, talking about the ego and the shadow projection, the anima, the animus, and all the rest of it. If that's what you want, it's all there. You just have to change the lens so that you know what you're talking about when you look at any given house or planet for that matter. Because the planets have an equal kind of association. Mars is, rules this in a health context, but it rules something else in a relationship context, and something else yet again in
It really depends on the context, especially.
context-driven conversations, or
Yep.
consultations is really what it comes down to. Yep. Okay, that was what I wanted to lay out for.
Yeah, thank you so much for going into that because I think so that does clear a lot up of how did this even conclusion even happen? But yeah, I totally see it. And it is one of those things where yes, it is an outrageous statement, but also there are plenty of people out there living outrageous lives. So that's something to consider. And for the person who commented that it's dangerous, yeah, potentially if the wrong person was reading it, but I don't know. I feel like with more advanced astrology books like this, something um that's not being put out there for just like the average pop astrology follower person. With the more
Oh,
advanced stuff, I feel like there's an assumed like asterisk. The whole chart matters as well. Look at the whole chart. So,
yeah, let me give you an example, just a quick example of how you can take something at face value, which sounds very logical based upon the premise of the statement, and yet if you subject it to scrutiny, we'll see whether it flounders or floats. So, for example, if you spend your time, trolling the internet, and especially looking at some of the most popular YouTube astrologers, you will inevitably counter something like I'm going to give you an example of that occurred on May 23rd, when Venus was in an exact conjunction with Jupiter in the last degree of Taurus. So a very, very well-known YouTube astrologer. went on at some length about what this means. And on the face of it, based upon these two planets, Venus in its own sign, Taurus, Venus, what we call the lesser benefic, and
Mhm.
in conjunction with Jupiter, the greater benefic. So two really good things, one supporting the other. It's logical, you can logically follow the statements. And so, I'll try to summarize basically what she said. But basically, this is one of the most benign, opportunistic, lucky, fortunate days of the year, like just truly spectacular. Everything good can happen during this time. Love, money, good health, great dining. Oh, be careful, don't eat too much because
Mhm.
Venus likes food and Jupiter will go to excess. You know that, you'll put on weight. I mean, this is all true and it all makes perfect sense. And on and on in that manner. If you want to play a lottery, now's the time to do it. Invest money in a chosen stock market, equity. This is the time to do it. Ask favors of your spouse because Venus represents the spouse and Jupiter is largesse and generosity. Borrow money, from whomever. This is the time to do all this stuff because there's never been a day like this. I swear to God, you've got to, take advantage of all this. Yet, does anybody, listening to that believe that this is all true of themselves, of their
Yeah.
who's
That day
going through
wasn't particularly notable for me, so I'm
oh, you
sure for a
remember
lot of
this
people
day?
it wasn't particularly notable.
Yeah, and even this is even in modern Western society where let's assume that most of us have the wherewithal to take ourselves out for dinner that evening if we wanted to, or in a relatively liberal society with an active social circle, you could enjoy some pleasures of the bed that evening, right? That's also consistent with this. But listening to this from some tribesperson in, central Congo, never mind somebody sitting in the ruins of Gaza City, this makes no sense whatsoever.
Hmm.
So, we know that we can't take, these summary things that are stated, as being so positive. On this day, somebody's dying. Somebody's just been told that they've got stomach cancer.
Hmm.
Somebody's kid just died, I never mind. I'll go on like that just to show counterexamples. You know that it's a world of experience, extremely varied, even though this is a wonderful aspect. But is it for everybody? Because for somebody else, that Venus and Jupiter are in a planetary war. And if one of them is the Lord of 6, 8, or 12, this could really blow up that whole theme for them. Sickness, trauma, or lose their shirt on the stock market that day, depending on where that Venus, what that Venus and Jupiter rule in their horoscope and where that transit actually occurs. So, so much of that those generic statements that we see so often on YouTube with the daily predictions and all the rest of that is pure entertainment. And buyer beware, right? Caveat emptor. We've
Yes.
got to look at that with a whole lot greater scrutiny before we get excited. But nobody's going to take such people to task because it's all feel good stuff, right? Counter examples would be back in July, mid-July, when Mars was conjunct Uranus, which everyone knows is potentially dangerous, violence-prone, explosive time. On top of that, transiting over Algol, one of the so-called evil stars. This is kind of like a very negative time, and people do get out there and say that this is be careful and exert due caution and due diligence. This is a dicey time, but they're
Right.
not going to harp on and on and on excessively about how like you shouldn't even be behind the wheel today, or or like lock up all your guns, or unplug all your appliances because Uranus rules electricity, and don't use, for God's sakes, don't use a power tool because Mars is tools and Uranus is electricity. They don't go on to such a degree to say such an exaggerated statement because the likelihood, but probably somebody did electrocute themselves or cut their finger off on the bandsaw that day. I mean, because the world's big and there's enough people for bad stuff to happen to. But as entertainment astrologers, people don't want to go out there and declare a whole shitload, excuse my French, of negative stuff because it scares people, right? And it's more
Yeah,
fun to create a feel-good atmosphere rather than a feel-bad and paranoid atmosphere, right? So,
I like that. And you make a good point. And when I post my own, because I post little transit updates
yeah,
out there myself, and even just when I'm writing up my own stuff, I really, and I'm still learning, of course, but I've been really trying to make it move towards more of a general worldview type of explanation rather than, oh, this is a good day for you to enter the lottery. Oh, this is a good, like, oh, be careful, you might get in a car crash today.
yeah.
Um, just keep it more general, I think. But then it's harder to get the clicks and views, so
Yeah, of course. So, we're operating under sort of conflicting impulses. I want to
hmm
be true to my science, but I also want this to be, engaging and informative and entertaining. It's trying to master the art of infotainment, right? Which is
Absolutely.
informing and entertaining at the same time. And, I love to do that when I write, and it's not always successful, but it's still a good objective, and to do no harm as well, too. It's normal to want to help rather than hurt. And as astrologers, we're invested. I mean, clients and even the lay public, if they're believers, will invest a lot of power in astrologers. And so they take our words, if you don't think, as long as you don't think astrology is ridiculous, people will, listen with, an open mind and think, well, this could be possible because it's presumably the astrologer is saying this on the basis of some grounds, and they're not just pulling it out of their ass, right?
hmm
So they're doing it on the basis of logic. And so we have to be careful with what we say. So although in my book, there's lots of, extreme statements, which, is part of the culture of Arthavada, making something a definitive statement. So you clearly know whether it's positive or negative, as opposed to just lukewarm. But we have to, couple that with further analysis to see, yeah, do we really want to say that to the client? And, in an active practice, you encounter that conundrum on a daily basis. Should I
Yes.
say this? I kind of believe that this is true, but damned if I want to frighten a client and make them, worry about this for the next 2 years because I'm saying, a couple of years' time, this or that could happen. Like, who wants to hang a cloud of dread over somebody? So we
A
move.
fine line to walk.
Yeah. So, but we got to be careful. But even um, unduly positive expectations are also damaging well too. Just briefly,
Yes.
back when I was in Montreal, I had a client who was, very much into a spiritual life, and she had been to India many times. She had never married. And when she did her trips to India, she was, let's say, her late 20s and early 30s. And she had several readings from Indian astrologers who said, oh my goodness, you're going to be married and you're going to have children. There is no doubt about it. No doubt about it. You will be married and you will have children. From their perspective, here was a mid-20s woman, very well put together, very attractive. She was of an age, marriageable, perfect age, childbearing age. They would look at her and they say, there's no possible reason under, for a normal person to say, why would not anybody want to marry her? Okay. So she came home from India several times with this belief that for sure she was going to be married and for sure she would have children. She came to me and said, well, I'm now like, the clock is ticking. I am 37, 38 or whatever, and I'm not married. And like, I'm wondering like if I'm even going to have children. And so, I went through this analysis and chose my words carefully.
Mhm.
But to keep it simple for you and our audience, I said, I believe, and I have to say it that way, I believe, other astrologers may say differently, and you're welcome to seek a second opinion. I believe you will never be married, and I believe you will never have children. I know that's a hard one to swallow if you
A
want.
hard thing to tell someone.
Yeah, yeah, it is. It is. But my teacher's guru used to say, Jyotish has teeth and it
Mhm.
can bite. It can not just kiss you and make you feel good. It can take a bite out of you as well too. It has a grounding in reality. It depends on what the astrologer, how blunt the astrologer wants to be. And like I was
Mhm.
reluctant to do this, but at the same time, this woman was of an age and had a heartfelt desire to know the truth. And she actually said to me, tell me what you really think. Okay, you've given me carte blanche to, tell it to you straight. But I buffered it by saying, I believe this.
Mhm.
Based upon my training, my analysis of your chart, I believe this. And the way, when I get in such situations, which I've been in a number of times too, I will say to people, am I 100% certain? Will I bet my mortgage on this? Will I bet $1,000 on this? No, 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 no. But I
Mhm.
will bet $100 on this. You don't want to lose $100 either, but I'll bet $100 on this, that will not happen for you, as opposed to betting the other way around that I believe it will happen for you. And when you contextualize it that way, people can sort of have an appreciation. Okay, you're not acting like, you're God's, mouthpiece, and you're also um, giving me a metric, like how confident you think you are. You won't bet $1,000, but you will bet $100 that this will not happen. So they can walk away and say, well, he believes that, but hey, I could beat the odds. And so whatever. So these things happen in a regular consultation, and sometimes you hear back from people. Sometimes, many times, people go away angry if they've asked for the truth and you've told it to them.
Oh yeah.
It's a little dicey, right? You take a risk with that. Yeah, you might not see that client again, or certainly they're not going to give you a word of mouth. But they did ask you to tell the truth. And here's the thing with astrology: once you start lying to make the client happy by telling them what you know they want to hear, or even what they have declared. I've had people, young women, sit down in front of me and clasp their hands like this and say, please tell me. I'm going to get a lot of Indian clients because Toronto's got a significant, East Asian population.
Mhm.
And this young woman who's of that age, in the 30s, please tell me I am going to get married at least to get my parents off my back so that I can move out. Until I get married, I can't move out. And until I get married, I hear no end of it. You're going to be a spinster and a shame to us. What's the matter with you? So that's pretty hard to overcome too. They've sat down. The first thing they've done is say a prayer to me that please, whatever you tell me what I want to hear. That's a high fence to climb over too. I've,
Yeah.
but as I say, once you start lying to tell the client what they want to hear, you're perjuring your own faith in your own system. And then after
Yes.
that, it's a slippery slope. Then you're going to be just wanting to do like the YouTube astrologer says, this Venus Jupiter conjunction in Taurus is going to be magnificent. No doubt about it. It's just the greatest thing this year. I mean, literally, those words were practically said. But once you start doing that, it's a slippery slope and it does not lead to a good place, neither for you,
Mm-mm.
nor for the client, nor for the credibility of the system that we espouse to uphold. It's a balancing
Exactly.
act. It's a balancing act. Tricky. It's a tightrope walk. We do it all the time, if you're aware of it.
Oh yes. Yeah. I've had to tell people a few hard things. Luckily nothing too crazy, but it's difficult. It is really hard to tell people, "Hey, maybe having children isn't the main mission for you. Maybe it's something else." And yeah, definitely a learning process of how do you break that news to someone? Absolutely.
We are very much indoctrinated as a society, if we've been exposed to it, to the Tony Robbins school of belief system. So
Mhm.
self-affirmation. And basically, I don't want to mess up his philosophy, but his thesis is basically this. If you want it badly enough, you can make it happen. So you end up with clients then like, I failed. I wanted married so badly, but I didn't get it, or I had it for a year or two and then I let it slip away. I failed, and they're in despair and depressed because of either one of those two circumstances. You can't imagine the relief such a person experiences when you say, well, you know what? Based upon your chart, this whole relationship thing, this is a really, really hard karma. I can look at three things here. Where's the Lord of the seventh house gone to? What's its condition? And what are the influences upon it? What planets are in the seventh house? What is their condition? And what are their influences upon it? And third, where is Venus, the significator relationship? Where is it gone in the horoscope? What is its condition? What are the influences upon it, benefic or malefic? That's a three-part judgment that you shouldn't be saying a word until you've gone through that. And incidentally, you can do that for everything in the horoscope. Will I have a child? Will I get married? Will I die this weekend? I'm being silly now, but you can parse just about any particular question in a three-part triage. Only after you do that. I mean, sometimes you could still be hung up on the fence after doing all that, and it happens. I've been there. I went around
Right.
the chart and then this three-way analysis, and I still don't know the answer. And there are, sort of fallback systems to go to if that's necessary. But only after we do that due diligence should we be making that sort of definitive statement. And even then, I will hedge my bets and say, this is my belief. Seek a second opinion if you wish. I would bet this much, not that much, et cetera, et cetera. But back to my point. You can't imagine the relief of such a client who's felt guilty for the past 7 years about their failed relationship, no traction in that matter, and they think it's their fault because they didn't do what Tony Robbins urged them to do, was try harder. And they failed. And when you say, your horoscope has got what we call fixed karma, a very hard bias against successful relationships, more likely to fail than not. They could say, oh my God, poof, you mean I've been like this since I was born? Yes, since the time you were a child. We would never tell you that, but your horoscope is difficult in that regard. Very. No, not all
Mhm.
horoscopes are like that. It's not always really easy to interpret. Sometimes you get, well, oftentimes you get very mixed reviews on that. Look at factor A, it's good. Factor B is bad. Factor C, it's so-so. Where does that leave me? It's problematic. But, if you can get on one side of the fence or the other with logic and heart for your client, it can actually be good for them, even with the truth. It sounds funny to say that, but they don't want to hear bad news. But if it's like, hey, the stock that you're in, it's going to tank. You've lost like $10,000 already. Do you want to lose the remaining 50,000 and get cents on the penny when you finally bail out? Get out now, take your loss, lay it against your taxes for the year, move on. Yeah, nobody wants to. People hate loss, right? They really hate it,
Yes.
and would rather hold a bad investment and cling to a bad marriage because they don't want to be a failure. And yet, in the right circumstance, when your house is burning down, Christ, you got to get out. You can't stay there,
Oh
running the
yes.
kitchen faucet and throwing pots of water at the fire. That ain't going to do it. Sorry, I told you I was guilty of.
Sometimes we just have to tell them to get out of the house.
Yeah. Sometimes, Tony Robbins it's a good philosophy. It's a positive kind of thing. But, on that score, have you ever heard of the millionaire mind? It's a series of, um, seminars that are offered for people who want to be millionaires. So people come from all over the country. They go to, LA or Hawaii or whatever for these conferences and, spend $5,000 to be there with these people, these animators, facilitators who drill them on a, positive thinking and self-affirmation, all the things to do, mundane things to do to make a million. And of the, 500 people who went that for that long weekend on, making a million, do they
Mhm.
all become millionaires? No, no way. Some
No.
some do, because maybe they have the karma for that. And others, although they're wishful, they just don't have the karma for it. It's not going to happen. So, go figure. Despite our best intentions, we can't have it all. That is karma. There's what we call fixed karma and unfixed karma. And so if it's fixed, it could be all really, really good in some areas of your life. Fantastic marriage, but you could be sick. You could have a fantastic career, but a lousy marriage. You could have incredible wealth, but terrible children. I mean, make up
Yeah.
anything, right? People enjoy good and bad luck contemporaneously, and it can be attributed to factors in their horoscope. Fixed karma for this, unfixed karma for that, and things that are actually on the balance. Hey, you've got a respiratory disorder. Fix this up, stop smoking, start getting some exercise, or, in a few years, you're going to have chronic, pulmonary disorder, and you're going to be on an oxygen tank. The person that hears that and ignores that goes on to have COPD and the oxygen tank. The person that hears that and says, you know what? I'm going to quit. And they tip that scales the other way because the scales are balanced. At that point, we have free will, for a lot of things, but we don't have free will in everything. We can't make ourselves millionaires. We can't make
Hmm.
ourselves famous as much as we want. For every Aerosmith, there are 1,000 garage bands in America that only get to play at their local bar or tavern once a week or less, right? Hope springs eternal, but reality is a cruel teacher.
As long as they're still having fun, that's what matters.
That does
But
matter.
Alan, I think we're out of time.
That's
Is
good.
there any, what's that?
Good.
Alan, where can people find you to keep following you and your work? Do you have a website you'd like to share at all?
Yes, I do have a website. I'm not sure how I'm going to share that with you at this
You
moment.
could either, if you share it in the chat, or you could just email it to me and I can just post it in the group, whichever is
Oh,
easiest for
yeah,
you.
by all means. Let me see if I can activate chat. Okay. Uh, okay. Find find Alan at www.nav. This is a funny name, Navam Shah. Um, also, oops, also on YouTube at how does that go? I think that's the way it appears there. And I'm on Facebook, which is probably one of the easiest ways for any of the people in this group to find me because this is where you've been facilitating your group work. And I can give my email address here as well too.
Okay.
And that's the third and final way, I guess, to do that. That ought to do it, right?
Yes, that does it.
If
Okay.
you look for me on email, yeah, just look for look for my face because there is another Alan Annand. I want to kill that guy, but he doesn't look like
Uh-oh.
he
You're
lives in
number one.
yeah
You're
he lives
number
in
one to us.
He lives in California. But yeah, my face is clear enough in my Facebook profile. So we'll leave it like that. My website,
Okay,
YouTube channel, or my email. All right.
perfect. Well,
Misty, thank you so much for hosting me for this. It's been a
thank
gas,
you for
as they say.
joining us. And this was a great conversation. We had a good amount of viewers, so I was very pleased with this one. And for everyone watching, Thank you for tuning in, and thank you for participating in the group discussions for the rest of the month. August's book of the month will be Chart Shapes: Code to Interpretation by Wanda Seller, and I will start posting discussion posts for that one on August 10th. And if you're still reading Mutual Reception, please feel free to continue participating in previous discussion posts at any time. But thank you, Alan, again for joining us, and I hope everyone has a wonderful rest of your week.
If I could just put one final footnote to that, for anyone
Yes.
who read this book and enjoyed it, please consider even the briefest of reviews on Amazon.com. Independent writers live and die on the basis of word of mouth. So
Mhm.
all of this helps. Thank you so much. And again, thank you, Misty, for inviting me into the book club. I've really enjoyed this.
Yay, awesome. I will see you later.
Okay, bye. Have a good evening.
Bye.